My husband's mistress came to my office today with a claim that she was pregnant. The words hung in the air of my executive suite, clashing with the quiet prestige of the mahogany furniture and the panoramic view of the city skyline. I am Elena Sterling, the CEO and primary shareholder of a multi-million-dollar logistics company, inherited from my father and expanded through my own sweat and sleepless nights. The woman standing across from my desk was barely 25, draped in a cheap imitation of a designer coat, clutching a sonogram like a winning lottery ticket. "You need to step aside, Elena," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and misplaced triumph. "Marcus told me everything. He told me the marriage has been over for years. He told me he owns this company and that you're just a figurehead he's kept around out of pity. But now that there's a baby, he's ready to take full control." I looked at her, and for a moment, I didn't feel anger. I felt a profound, weary pity. She had no idea who I was, and more importantly, she had no idea who my husband really was. To understand how we got to this ridiculous moment, I have to go back to the beginning of my marriage to Marcus. When I met him 10 years ago, he was a charismatic, struggling salesman. I was young, blinded by his charm, and convinced that my wealth was a barrier to finding real love. I wanted someone who loved me for my mind, not my bank account. When we married, I gave him a job at the company not as an executive, but as a mid-level manager in the distribution wing. I wanted him to earn his way up, but Marcus was never interested in earning anything. Over the years, he settled into a comfortable life of mediocrity, supported entirely by my dividends. He had a fancy title, Vice President of Internal Relations, which I had created specifically to keep him busy and out of the way of actual decision-making. He had a company car, a generous expense account, and the prestige that came with the Sterling name. What I didn't realize was that Marcus had spent the last year using that prestige to build a fantasy world. While I was in board meetings and navigating international trade laws, Marcus was spending his afternoons in high-end bars, flashing his company credit card and telling anyone who would listen that he was the Sterling in Sterling Logistics. He had found this girl, Tiffany, and spun a web of lies so intricate that he had trapped himself in it. He told her I was a bitter employee, an old family friend who handled the boring paperwork while he ran the empire. He told her the mansion we lived in was his, the private jet was his, and that he was simply waiting for the right moment to retire me. As I sat behind my desk, listening to Tiffany describe the nursery Marcus had promised to build in the east wing of my home, I realized the depth of his delusion. He had actually convinced this girl that he was the king of the castle. "I see," I said, my voice cold and professional. I didn't scream. "I didn't throw her out. And did Marcus tell you that we have a very strict policy regarding family members and company assets?" Tiffany smirked. "He told me he makes the policies. He said you'd be difficult, but that the law is on his side because he's the owner." I leaned back and pressed the intercom. "Sarah, could you please bring in the master employee file for Marcus Sterling and the original articles of incorporation? Oh, and call security to stand by the door." The next 10 minutes were the most silent of my life. I watched the girl's confidence begin to flicker like a dying candle. When Sarah brought the documents, I slid them across the desk. I showed Tiffany the payroll records, Marcus's modest salary, his performance reviews, which were mostly average, and finally, the incorporation papers that showed 98% of the company belonged to me, with the remaining 2% in a trust for my charitable foundation. Marcus is an employee, Tiffany, I said softly. He owns nothing. Not this desk, not his car, not even the suit he wore to dinner with you last night. It's all leased by the company, and the company belongs to me. The girl's face went from pale to a sickly shade of gray. She grabbed the papers, her eyes darting across the legal text. No, he said. He said you were just a secretary who got lucky in the divorce settlement. There is no divorce settlement yet, I replied, but there will be one by 5 o'clock today. At that exact moment, Marcus burst into the room. He had clearly heard from the front desk that Tiffany was here. He looked frantic, his expensive tie crooked, sweat beading on his forehead. He saw the papers on the desk. He saw the look on my face. Elena, honey, I can explain, he stammered, his eyes darting toward Tiffany. She's a disgruntled client. She's crazy. She's making things up. Tiffany stood up, her eyes flashing with a different kind of fire. Disgruntled client? Marcus, you told me we were moving into the penthouse next month. You told me you were firing this woman. Marcus turned to her, his voice a pathetic hiss. Shut up, Tiffany. Not now. I watched the two of them, the liar and the girl who wanted to be a queen. It was a pathetic theater. I stood up, smoothing my skirt. Marcus, you're fired, I said, for gross misconduct and misuse of company resources. Security is currently emptying your desk into a cardboard box. Your company car has been disabled via GPS and is being towed as we speak. You have 30 minutes to leave this building. Marcus turned back to me, his bravado finally crumbling. Elena, please. You can't do this. I'm your husband. You were a subsidized tenant in my life, Marcus. The lease just expired. I turned my attention to Tiffany, and as for the baby, I wish you luck. Though I suspect raising a child on the unemployment benefits of a disgraced middle manager wasn't quite the palace life you were envisioning. Tiffany looked at Marcus, really looked at him, seeing the small, desperate man he actually was without my shadow to make him look tall. Then she did something unexpected. She burst out laughing. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was sharp and jagged. The baby? She spat, looking at Marcus with pure loathing. There is no baby, you idiot. I lied to get you to finally leave her so I could get my hands on the empire. I wasn't going to waste my youth on a man like you without a guaranteed payout. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus looked like he had been struck by lightning. He had destroyed his life for a woman who was playing the exact same game he was. They were two predators who had accidentally tried to eat each other. Tiffany grabbed her bag, adjusted her coat, and walked toward the door. She didn't look back at him. Don't bother calling me, Marcus. I don't date internal relations managers. She walked out, and a moment later, security entered to escort Marcus out. He tried to grab my hand, to plead, to cry, but I simply turned my chair around to face the window. I watched the city below, bustling and indifferent to the drama in my office. I heard the door click shut. The silence returned, heavy and sweet. For 10 years, I had carried him. I had given him a world he didn't earn and a love he didn't deserve. I had allowed myself to be the figurehead of my own marriage while I ran a kingdom. But as I sat there, the sun reflecting off the glass of the empty chair across from me, I felt a weight lift that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. The company was mine. The house was mine. The future was mine. And for the first time in a decade, the air in my office felt perfectly, beautifully clean.